Well, someone is trying to kill the president. Today, we're going to talk about some things we can learn about protecting the present and future president of the United States. We're going to cover that and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crime Buster, what some people are calling, well, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. The Charlie Crime Buster name and all forms and abbreviations are property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent unless or until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains adult subject matter. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome back to Charlie Crime Buster. Now, we've been away for several weeks, and now we're back at it, bringing you a story not only about crime, but about capital crime, crime against the nation of America. Because, my friend, no matter your political view, no one should want to see America's president killed. And thanks to some dedicated people, those who stand between the president and the assassin's bullet, well, those attempts did not work. 3 of them over the past couple of years. Well, we're going to take a deep dive into these attempts and learn some amazing things today about this program. But before we do that, let me say a special welcome to those who join us for the very first time. Do me a favor, hit that like button. If you would, please give us just give us a rate. Oh, a 5-star rate. You see, the more we get those rates, the better we're able to get this podcast out into other people's hands. So do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and give us a 5-star rate, and that will be a big help to us.
The following podcast is brought to you by PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. Audio is provided by Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com.
Well, welcome back to the show. Today we're diving into a serious and complex topic. The 3 most recent assassination attempts targeting President Donald Trump, and what they reveal about how modern security works today, where it fails, and how it's evolving in real times. You see, my friend, this is not just about 3 isolated incidents. It's about patterns. It's about weaknesses and how threats against the world's leaders are changing. To begin with, we will start today's program with kind of giving a little summary of the 3 incidents whereby there was an attempt made to assassinate President Donald Trump. Let's start with a quick recap. The first one was in July 2024. It happened in a town called Butler, Pennsylvania. It was at a campaign rally. There, a gunman positioned on elevated ground on a rooftop opened fire. 1 bullet grazed President Trump's ear. A bystander was killed. Others were seriously injured. And that shooter, well, he was ultimately taken out by Secret Service counter snipers. Now, this was, of course, the most serious incident of the 3. Because in this time, the attacker actually succeeded in firing and causing casualties. So this was a serious one, and it happened in July 2024. Now, all of them are serious, but the second one happened in September of 2024, and it happened, of all places, at a Florida golf course. There, a man hid near Trump's golf course with a rifle. Apparently, he was waiting for just the right moment. But this time, a Secret Service agent spotted him early. The suspect fled, but he was later captured. Thankfully, no shots reached the President of the United States of America. That brings us to the third one, the one that's most recent, that happened just a few days ago, April 2026 in Washington, D.C., and of all places, well, it was at that place where freedom of speech is supposed to be protected. It was protected in more ways than one at this one. It was the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and there a gunman attempted to breach the perimeter and actually fired a weapon. But thankfully, security stopped him before he could get anywhere near Trump. No one was killed. However, there was a Secret Service agent that was shot. Thankfully, he had a bulletproof vest on, and that saved his life, no doubt. At least saved him from serious injury. So here is 3 different attempts, and yet 3 very different outcomes. The question that we should be asking ourselves regarding these 3 attempts is, what about the security? What did work, and what perhaps did not work? We're going to discuss that in just a moment, but right now we're going to take just a moment to pause, take a deep breath, and share with you what we call Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now, as you know, every week at Charlie Crimebuster, when we have a podcast, we try to share with you a Crazy Crook story, kind of lighten the load a little bit of some of the dark things that we cover. And unfortunately, many of these stories come from my home state right here in Florida, where I am allegedly living right now, the Sunshine State. And instead of being a Florida man, it is a Florida woman. Yep, a Florida woman was allegedly so drunk behind the wheel that she was pulled over driving the wrong way down the road. And it got a little bit hairy when Cammie Ellis, 52 years of age, was pulled over by a deputy in Tampa who served with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. That was on a Sunday around 12:30 a.m. And the officer noticed that the vehicle was traveling the wrong way. Saw her jump a curb. And the body camera footage, well, it posted to the department's Facebook page. And here's how it kind of went. The officer said, "You feeling okay?" That's what he asked her when he pulled her over. She said, "Yeah, I'm good." He said, "You don't know how to cut your car off?" You see, it appeared that Ellis was struggling to shut off the car. The deputy then says, "Well, does the car belong to you?" "Yep," she said, "it does." And after finally shutting off the vehicle, the cop tells her he pulled her over because of her erratic driving. He asked her to hand over her license. But get this crazy Florida lady, instead of handing over her license, she handed over her credit card. He then looks at her and said, "That's your credit card." Well, realizing her mistake, she tries again. But this time, he can't make it up. She handed him a Barnes & Noble gift card. Yep, a Barnes & Noble gift card. He said, "Well, that's a Barnes & Noble gift card." The video then shows Ellis standing outside her vehicle as the officer asked her in those sobriety checks to step one step forward. She barely manages it. She stops. He tells her to put her glasses back on. And then he tells her to place her hands behind the back. He already realizes it's too dangerous to go on with this sobriety check. She'll kill herself. So he then arrested her, charged her with driving under the influence, according to the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. And arrest report shows, surprise, 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 she blew .209, more than twice the legal limit after being pulled over. And this crazy lady, she was later released on a $1,000 bond. So this lady, who was so drunk that she didn't really know what she was doing, had no business being on the road, thanks to an alert deputy in Hillsborough County, pulled her over, and instead of handing over her license, first of all, handed him a credit card, then handed him a gift card. This crazy crook is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now back to our main focus. We've been talking about these 3 attempts on President Trump. I've been talking about the 3 attempts and we summarized them. But now we're going to be talking about where did security really fail and where did security really succeed. And so to go back, let's go back to the first one in Pennsylvania. Now, in Pennsylvania, the biggest issue, my friend, as we have already had a podcast on that, and feel free to go back into the repertoire of Charlie Crimebuster's podcast, and you can find we had some podcasts already on the Butler situation. But the biggest thing that we found then and find now was the biggest issue was the perimeter. You see, the attacker found a vantage point. It was outside of the main security zone. But there he found him to find a clear line of sight. He was up on top of a roof. It was a major breakdown. In fact, there was such a failure that the head of the Secret Service had to step down. And the big point that we pointed out in those podcasts of past was that there was no clear communication between the various agencies and the department's own site. There was no one posted on that rooftop. There was nobody observing that rooftop. Now, the government had been spotted numerous times, and yet no one even checked him out. The government, get this, had even flown a drone earlier in that day and went unnoticed by the officials. And even though there were people that noticed him up on that rooftop, who noticed him in a situation where he was about to take a shot because there was a breakdown in communication, the people were not on the same radio band, they could not reach the Secret Service in time, even though past that time, they took the guy out, but before that time, they failed to take him out. Somebody was killed. People were seriously injured. The president's ear was glazed by a bullet. Serious breaches took place. Yep, that's what took place in Butler. But even there, I will have to say response mattered. Yep, response mattered. Finally, the snipers took him out. In a matter of seconds after he fired, they took him out. And that is great. But how much better it would have been if they could have taken him out before those first shots were fired, before a man lost his life, before a family lost a father, before a wife lost a husband. But then response did matter. Agents reacted within seconds after the shot, and they prevented an even greater loss of life. And I can't help but think about those brave agents there that was in that first layer there around the president, not the outer layer, but the layer around the president. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They jumped on the stage, and they put themselves between a gunman and the president. They were willing to take a bullet themselves. It was a great heroic act of courage. And yet there were things that we learned from there about protecting that outer area. And there were things that we learned from there about communicating with the local law enforcement and agencies on the ground. So yes, we did learn about a whole lot about protecting the president from Butler. Maybe it was much, much later than we should have learned it, but we did learn a lot about it. All right, let's talk about the other one, the one in Florida. Yep, down here in Florida. Well, thankfully, the system worked much earlier in that chain. You see, in Florida, detection happened before the attack even began. That's a huge difference, my friend, because stopping a threat early is far easier than reacting mid-crisis. But however, even here, one cannot but help wonder how someone could have hidden in the bushes and not seen before. Why, I guess I should say, was the entire golf course not checked out before the president even arrived? Why did they not catch this assassin earlier? This assassin was literally lying in wait to kill the president of the United States. Now, thankfully, the agent walking ahead of the president saw the threat and responded to it. It worked like it was supposed to work. But the question is, how did it happen that this guy was able to be in that place in the first place, lying in wait for the president? Why wasn't he noticed beforehand? That's some things to think about when it comes to the Florida attempt. So now let's go to Washington. In Washington, I have to say we saw layered security doing its job, even though I got to tell you, that attacker got close enough to fire even while he was in multiple security layers that prevented him from reaching the protected area. He was able to fire at an agent. Now, if you saw the video that I saw, you would have to wonder if that outer layer perhaps did get a little lax, especially after the crowd had already passed through. They were winding down. And it was at that time in the outer area, after the crowd had already passed through that outer area into the venue, it was there that the attack began. He ran through several armed guards, even past them. Well, thankfully, he was subdued, and I have to hand it to him in literally seconds. They got him down, but it was still very alarming to see that he passed several people before he was apprehended. And also, you have to ask yourself, how could it be that someone could go to that hotel, check into a room, and then walk around that hotel on the way to his place, armed and dressed as he was with no detection. Why wasn't he detected even earlier than reaching that outer ring of security? Some things we have to ask ourselves. So let me ask you, are we learning from these things? Are we actually learning anything from these things? Well, I think there is one takeaway here, and it's this. Modern protection, my friend, is not just about reacting fast. Thankfully, we were able to do that. But it is about detecting threats before they fully form. It's getting to the attackers before they get to us. And there is a lot of things I think that we could learn from that. And thankfully, America is the type of country, and our leadership, especially in law enforcement, we are constantly trying to learn how to do a better job. There are always those after-action reports. In those after-action reports, we always find ways that we can do better. And I think that we've seen in the progression of these three attacks, we have seen that the service and law enforcement and the agencies are doing a better job. But doing a better job does not necessarily mean we're doing the best job. There's still so much more that we can do. And we'll talk about a little bit of that in a moment. But right now, I think it would be good for us to talk about the attackers themselves. What could it be that maybe they had in common with one another? I could not help but ask myself the question, what is it that these attackers, these guys who have tried to kill the President of the United States, what is it that they had in common? I have to tell you, though, in looking at it, I cannot see that there's a single profile, but I can see that there are patterns. First of all, let me say this. All three were what we call lone wolves. They were lone actors. They were operating independently. Now, that's pretty significant because when you have somebody acting independently, it does make those threats harder to detect. Now, we all know they used accessible weapons, usually mainly firearms. And we do also know that they targeted moments of opportunity. And they really found themselves in not the most secure inner zones, but all of them at the edges. It was at the edge of the rally. It was at the edge of the golf course. It was in the outer perimeter of Washington. And we also know that they all three showed some level of planning. Though they were not always sophisticated plans, but there were actually planning. So you see, my friend, the pattern really isn't about who they are. Everybody tries to say, well, who are these people? What about them? The real thing is not who they are if we're going to really be effective in this. It's how they acted. How they acted. Something else I thought would be really interesting to look at in these attacks against the president was how this compares to maybe other attacks in the past. And when you look at that, you can see that things have really changed. I think all of us, particularly those of us who are a little older in life, we can always go back to the time when we were even living then or somebody told us about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And we do know there that the weakness there was open exposure. Elevated positions, again, were not secured. And the concept of a modern perimeter, well, that barely existed during that time. And so we've come a long way from 1963 when the president could just get in a motorcade and just drive down the street and hopefully, people will be looking as they go. Today, those areas are scouted out way in advance and people look at any elevated area. They go in and they look, where could there be a possible vulnerable part of this security plan? And so it's improved a whole lot since then. Now, in 1981, when Ronald Reagan was shot, incidentally, there at that same hotel where the Washington thing took place, the issue then was proximity. That attacker got close in a crowd. Again, rapid response by agents saved Reagan's life, but he got way too close to the president with a weapon. I don't think you'll see that today. Particularly that inner round around the president is really protected. None of these last three attempts got within that inner circle. That inner circle was locked down well, and they responded very, very well. So if you want to know the real difference between some of the assassination attempts in history and the assassination attempts in these past couple of years, these last three attempts, we can really see that back then, the focus was stay close and react fast. But today, my friend, the focus is a little different. Today, the focus is detect early, control the space, have certain layers of defense, the inner, the middle, the outer, and have those layers covered completely. This is where there was a breakdown at Butler. The outer layer was not covered completely. But today we're looking at detecting it early, controlling the space, watching for those layer defenses. So I guess we got to ask ourselves today, what is the big picture? When you put it all together, I think you can see that there is a very clear shift that's emerging in all of these situations. The old model, protect the president at the last second. The new model, stop the threat long before it gets close. We have to be working on that new model. We have to work on those outer areas of protection. It is because in these outer areas is where all three of these threats have come. And we have to get better at that. And we have to realize that even advanced systems can fail, especially at the outer edges. And that, my friend, is where the future security efforts need to be laser focused, again, on those outer areas. Now, I have to say something about the era in which we're living in. And this is not being political. I don't care which side of the political fence you're on. There is way too much rhetoric out there that's hateful, and way too much rhetoric out there that's feeding some of these guys on the outer edge to encourage them, unfortunately, to do these drastic things. All of these people, in my opinion, thought that they were doing something that was good, when in fact what they were doing was something that was evil. When we come to the place of our rhetoric that everybody on the other side is called something like a Nazi or something like a fascist, and when we put those thoughts into people's heads, then we can expect this kind of behavior from those who are on the outer edge, those who are on the fringes. Whatever happened to just debating the real issues? Whatever happened to just standing up and saying, let me hear what you say, and then let me say what I think about that situation? About learning to disagree agreeably, regardless of where you are on the spectrum. Because this idea of vilifying everybody that's on the other side of your political beliefs is not working, my friend. It is causing violence in this nation. Violence that we don't need. We've had that in the past. We had that when President Kennedy was shot and killed. We had that when Martin Luther King was shot and killed. We had that when Robert Kennedy, when he was shot and killed. We've had that in the past. We do not need to return there, my friend. We need to take stock right now and to learn that America is built on a society that has different opinions. And we're built on arguing those opinions with our words, not with our violence. But our words, instead of formulating thoughts, instead of formulating arguments, we are formulating violence with our words. And we need to get back off of that, my friend. We need to get back off of that. So let's talk about what we've talked about today. There were 3 attempts, 3 outcomes. And now we know we have a constantly evolving system to protect the president. And we're always trying to stay one step ahead. And if I know anything, we've learned from each of these assassination attempts. We learn from Butler, Pennsylvania. We learned that we've got to watch those outer areas. We learned the same thing from down here in South Florida at the golf course. And now we're going to learn from what happened in Washington, D.C. Thankfully, law enforcement and those who are involved in protecting the president are always taking after-action reports, always looking on how we can improve. And my friend, if we keep doing that, we will get better at protecting our president, regardless of what political party the president may be in at the time. If only we could also ask ourselves, as human beings, as we express our political beliefs, could we not learn from that as well? And could we not get a little better with the rhetoric that we use and learn to disagree a little more agreeably? That, my friend, would go a long way into decreasing these hideous attacks on the freedom of America. Well, thank you for joining us. Join us next week as we'll take another deep dive. But thank you again for joining Charlie Crimebuster. Until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Peacemaker Network, and also encourage you to support the first responders, military, and law enforcement personnel by contributing to the Peacemaker Network. That's peacemakernetwork.com. All music and sound effects are courtesy of Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com. You can also support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, tag @CharlieCrimebuster, and then click the subscribe button. By doing so, you'll be notified each time we drop one of our shows. Another more convenient way for you to listen to our podcasts, or for you to say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you, so please send them to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster.